In the silence before dawn, the sea always whispered its secrets. During the Second World War, navies from every nation trusted their warships as shields against the unknown. Among them were the destroyers, fast, lean, and built for battle. But not all were perfect. Some ships carried flaws so deep that they endangered the very men who served on them. Their steel hulls may have been designed for war, but they also mirrored a truth that reaches beyond oceans, that even the fight for freedom, imperfection, and injustice can shape destiny. The story of 5 of the most flawed destroyers of the Second World War is not simply about machines. It is about people, sailors who lived and breathed inside those steel walls. Men, young and old, white and black, who risked everything not only against the enemy abroad, but against the quiet enemy of inequality at home. They were told they were fighting for liberty, but many carried the weight of knowing that liberty was still not fully theirs. The first ship, the French Lufthansa, was a vessel that promised speed unlike any other. She could cut across waves like an arrow, the pride of her engineers. But her flaw was balance. Speed demanded sacrifice, and what she gained in swiftness, she lost in stability. In storms, she shook violently. In battle, her armor was thin. Sailors whispered prayers each night, knowing a single strike could tear her apart. Still, men stood tall upon her deck. Black seamen among them, often relegated to lower duties, proved again and again that courage was not determined by rank, color, or recognition. They endured the rolling seas and the threat of sudden fire, carrying themselves with quiet dignity, even as the ship herself seemed ready to collapse beneath them. Then there was the British tribal-class destroyer. Built strong, wide, and powerful, she was a marvel on paper, yet her flaw lay in her very strength. Designed for gun duels with other destroyers, she carried fewer torpedoes, leaving her vulnerable in the cruel chess game of naval warfare. The sailors who served aboard her knew this flaw, but they did not complain. Many of them, black men from the colonies, Jamaica, Trinidad, Africa, were expected to fight for an empire that did not see them as equals. Their sweat and labor kept the boilers burning. Their hands fed the hungry guns, yet their voices were seldom heard. Like the ship itself, they were undervalued for what they truly carried: endurance, loyalty, and the right to be remembered. Across the Pacific, the Japanese Fubuki-class destroyer was hailed as revolutionary. When she was launched, she carried heavier firepower than anything her enemies could match. Admirals called her the special type. But hidden beneath her strength was fragility. Her design pushed limits, so far that she became unstable. Heavy guns rocked her decks, and her hull strained under the weight of ambition. Many of these ships capsized in storms or cracked under fire. For the sailors, Japanese conscripts, often farm boys with no choice, the flaw was unforgiving. For the black Americans watching from afar, fighting in segregated units, the Fubuki story reflected a truth they understood. Greatness built without balance can collapse under its own weight. Dreams require justice, or else they sink into tragedy. America's own Clemson-class destroyers tell perhaps the most painful story. They were relics of the First World War, rushed into service again when new ships were not ready. Their flaw was age. Their thin hulls leaked, their engines sputtered, and their guns could not always keep pace with the modern war. Yet sailors were sent to fight in them, knowing the risks. Among them were black mess attendants, denied the chance to serve as gunners or officers. Still, in moment of fire and chaos, these men showed that valor is not bound by assignment. On burning decks, they carried the wounded, manned the hoses, even fired back when officers fell. History often silenced their names, but their actions echoed louder than the ship's guns ever could. The fifth, the German Type 1936 class, was a paradox of engineering. Long, sleek, and bristling with weapons, she looked fierce. But her engines were plagued with faults, her range too short for the vast ocean she sought to command. Again and again, these destroyers broke down far from home, leaving their crews stranded in hostile seas. The flaw was ambition beyond reach. The men aboard them were trapped by decisions made far above their heads, much like the black soldiers and sailors who found themselves trapped within a system of segregation, expected to fight for nations that denied them equality. Still, both held on. Still, both survived where they could, because giving up was never an option. As the war raged, these destroyers carried men into battles they were not always prepared for. Their flaws were written into their steel, but the hearts of men aboard them told a different story. On every deck, in every engine room, in every cramped bunk, were men who wanted only to live with dignity. For black sailors, that dignity was hard-won. They endured not only the terror of battle, but the sting of discrimination. They knew the bitter irony that they fought against tyranny abroad while living under its shadow at home. And yet, when shells fell, when torpedoes cut through the sea, when the sky turned red with fire, these men stood together, side by side. Skin color did not stop bullets, nor did it define bravery. The flawed ships became floating symbols of a larger truth, that flaws exist not only in machines, but in the systems that build them. And just as sailors found ways to keep their ships afloat, so too did black men and women find ways to keep their spirit alive, to claim their place in history with honor. The war ended, and many of these destroyers met their fate, scrapped, sunk, or forgotten, but their stories remain. They remind us that perfection was never the measure of greatness. It was the resilience of those who served, the dignity they carried into the face of injustice, the courage to fight when the world doubted them. These flawed destroyers, like the flawed nations that built them, still carried men who dreamed of something greater, a world where freedom was not a promise on paper, but a reality for all. This is not just naval history. It is human history. It is a reminder that in every flawed vessel, in every broken system, there are lives that shine with courage. And in their courage, we find the power to demand better, for ships, for nations, and for each other. The sea remembers their struggle, and so must we. The ocean in wartime is a place of silence and thunder. During the Second World War, navies trusted their destroyers, lean, fast warships, to guard them against unseen threats. But not every ship was perfect. Some were built with flaws so deep that they risked not only battles, but the lives of the men who served on them. Their stories remind us that imperfection exists not just in steel, but in the systems that shape their crews. The first was the French Lufthansa. She was the fastest destroyer of her time, slicing through the waves like lightning. But speed came at a cost. Her armor was paper-thin, her stability poor. Sailors lived with the fear that one lucky strike could tear her apart. Yet those aboard, including black sailors forced into the lowest ranks, stood strong. Their courage was not in the steel of the ship, but in the dignity with which they endured. Then came the British tribal class. Big, powerful, bristling with guns, she was designed for duels at sea. But her flaw was in balance. Heavy guns, fewer torpedoes. She was strong where she did not always need to be, and weak where it mattered most. On her decks worked men from across the empire, Jamaica, Africa, the Caribbean, expected to fight for a flag that often denied them equality. Still, they kept the boilers burning, the guns loaded, and their heads held high. In the Pacific, the Japanese Fubuki class was called the special type. She carried firepower greater than any destroyer before her. Admirals were proud, but ambition weighed her down. Her hull strained, her balance faltered, and in storms she capsized. Many young sailors, simple farm boys in uniform, never returned. For black Americans fighting in segregated ranks, the lesson was clear. Greatness without justice collapses under its own weight. The American Clemson class was another story. Old, worn-out ships from the First World War rushed back into service. Their flaw was age, thin armor, weak engines, leaky hulls. But they were all that was available. Black sailors on these ships were often reduced to serving food as mess attendants, denied the chance to fight. Yet when battle came, many stepped forward, carrying wounded men, manning guns, saving lives. Their valor was not bound by their assignment, even if history tried to silence it. Finally, the German Type 1936 class. Sleek, fast, heavily armed. On paper, they looked invincible. In reality, their engines failed, their range was short, and far from home they broke down again and again. The men trapped aboard them paid the price for ambition stretched too far, just as countless black servicemen paid the price for a democracy that still refused them full equality. These flawed ships carried young men into storms, into fire, into fear. They carried soldiers who dreamed of freedom, even while their own freedoms were denied. And yet, when shells rained down and seas rose high, those sailors stood shoulder to shoulder. Bullets did not stop to ask about skin color, and bravery was never defined by rank or race. In the end, most of these destroyers were scrapped, sunk, or forgotten, but their legacy is more than steel. It is the resilience of the men who served. It is the dignity of those who fought 2 wars at once, one against fascism overseas and one against discrimination at home. The story of the 5 most flawed destroyers in World War II is not about failure. It is about endurance. It is about courage. And above all, it is about the unshakable spirit of those who demanded to be seen, remembered, and respected, because history is not written only in victories. Sometimes, it is written in the strength to stand tall aboard a flawed ship in a flawed world and still believe in